Welcome back to Violent Money TV. Today I am talking all about Cage Warriors 167 and 168 that went down this past weekend at the BEC Arena in Manchester. I was there for both nights, so I'm just going to recap those cards and the general experience. Before we go, kind of fight by fight and talk about them, let's talk a little bit about just the two events as a whole. Kicking it off with Unplugged that went down on the Friday night. My first experience of an Unplugged show. I was very excited for this one to witness this kind of, different style of show. And ultimately, for me, and I think that this was the same for people watching at home, it didn't really feel like the other Unplugged shows that you've had from Cage Warriors. They tend to be done in like a studio setting rather than an arena. This, when you walked into the BEC Arena, it was cut essentially in half, if not more, actually, because where the cage is more towards one side of the arena, and then it goes back really far. So it was probably more than half in total. And this was an invite-only show. There was no tickets or anything like that. But they had given out quite a lot of tickets for this one. I later spoke to Brad Wharton, the commentator, and he explained why that was, and that essentially, cornering off even more of the venue would have been too much hassle for what it was worth. So it didn't really feel super, close and intense and like that kind of Unplugged vibe, or like even an Apex vibe even. So it's hard to compare the two. That's kind of what I went into the event looking to do, was find out what it was like to experience a show like this and then compare it to the next night. But I don't know if you were really able to do that, because this didn't feel like an MMA show with a really small crowd. This just felt like a smaller version of Cage Warriors, because a lot of the fighters that have big fan bases and stuff still seem to bring, a decent amount of supporters with them, who had won tickets and things like that. So I don't think Unplugged, maybe, it didn't feel like an Unplugged. It just felt like a kind of almost like a prelude to the following night, which I think I wrote that in my review, the written review that's up on the Violent Money TV website now, so you can check that out if you would rather read all about the event. But I will go into a little bit more detail here on this video. So in terms of other things that I'm not going to talk about in terms of the fights, just experiences over the two nights. Kicking off the actual entire weekend of fights was the teammate of the Hardwick brothers, Leon Arms. So I got to speak a little bit to George and Harry Hardwick, of course. George was supposed to be coming back to Cage Warriors to headline this London card in a couple of weeks that I'm also going to be going to, but he had that really bad injury, that jaw injury, which I'm sure you will have seen about on social media. So it's good to catch up with George and just see where he's at with that. He's kind of making progress, but I believe he said 6 weeks until he can even return to full contact training. So it's going to be a while, I think, before we see George, but he seems on the mend and he seems quite positive about it. So that was cool to see. One of the highlights for me, actually, of the Unplugged show was Emil Brown was in action. His fight was one of the best fights of the whole weekend. But with him from Team Renegade was Joby Clayton, of course, the former coach of Anthony Joshua. So I got to speak to Joby a little bit about what he thought of AJ's win against Ngannou. And I wish I'd been able to record that, because it was some great insight from him. And, hopefully, maybe I can catch up with him at some point in the future and put a video out on it, because it was really, really good stuff. The following night, the Saturday night, the crowd at the BEC Arena I thought was fantastic. We'll get onto this as we go through the fights, but obviously a ton of people were there to support the next generation MMA fighters, which you would expect. That's become basically a staple of these Manchester shows, is that the majority of the crowd that are there are to support those guys. And yeah, I mean, we'll get to it when we go through the fights. I had a great chat with Darren Stewart, who was on comms for the main card of that event, doing interviews and stuff like that. I didn't really get to listen to the broadcast too much, only a little bit here and there, but it sounded really good from what I'd heard, and I remember listening to Darren do it at London and thinking he was really, really good on there. So it seemed like the commentary was always good because it's Cage Warriors, but I think Darren is a really, really good addition, actually, and he has like a different insight to a lot of people, because I spoke to Darren about this, and maybe we'll do an interview at some point and talk to him about it and really kind of get into how he feels about commentary and stuff. But he does just approach things from a different outlook, and I think that makes it really interesting. And of course, one of the things that a lot of people will have seen on social media, the Saturday night show, the full BEC Arena show, star-studded, guests in the house for that one. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a Cage Warriors show where you've got two active UFC champions in the building at the same time. Maybe there was one where Leon and Tom have been together at one. I'm not too sure. But yeah, Leon Edwards, Tom Aspinall in the building. Of course, Paddy and Molly. Christian Leroy Duncan, my favourite fighter. So yeah, it was cool. It was a cool show. But of course, it was all about the fight. So let's get into this Unplugged card. I'll quickly run through some of the highlights. I think one of the best fights of the whole weekend was Leon Arms versus Christian Tosco in that opening bout. Yeah, it was really, really good. So I think that if you watch that fight, even if you didn't know that Leon trains with the Hardwicks, you could probably guess, because I thought he fought, incredibly similar, especially to George. Like Harry has a similar style, but the body shots from Leon I thought were, particularly reminiscent of George. And I know that he trains with the MMA Fight Academy. But still, the MMA Fight Academy was kind of the story of this night, I thought. Sergio Gavinelli, that first round finish, that was brutal. So aggressive, that guy. He seems like a nightmare. I feel like it's going to be tough to get him an opponent for a fight after that performance, because the guy just looks ferocious. And then the other guy, one of the other guys from the MMA Fight Academy that was on the card, Anthony Orozco, taking on Lucas Rodriguez. Anthony, we spoke to him on the channel before one of his previous interviews. Of course, he was supposed to fight out in San Diego, and then his fight fell off literally on the day of the fight. So then he got rebooked for this. His wrestling is fantastic, so he was absolutely dominant in that field. I think he was a little bit disappointed to not get the finish, but overall quite happy with his performance. And I think that the opponent put up a pretty good fight to not get caught in anything, to be honest, because I thought Orozco was going to finish him quite early on, to be honest. But yeah, good stuff from him. And I would say the same for Amore Jr. looked really good, actually, against Giuseppe Ruggeri. I was surprised by that win. Teddy Stringer, wrapping things up for the MMA Fight Academy, looked great. 3-0 now in his career. The guy is so exciting. You've got to be watching Teddy Stringer if you're a UK MMA fan. He's just great. Connor Wilson versus Davide Scarano was a good fight. Good win for Connor Wilson. I've skipped over a fight there because I'm going to go back to that a little bit later on. Shozak Kadrian taking on Emmanuel Zakaria and getting him out of there in the first round. Very impressive performance from him, I thought. So excited to see how he kicks on in Cage Warriors. Emil Brown versus Rafael Aronov was a crazy fight for as long as it lasted. Emil, I believe, hurt Aronov quite early, and then Aronov hurt Emil. Emil was the one shooting for takedowns. It seemed like Emil got hurt at the start of the second round as well, but he did again get the takedown, and then he gets the choke in that second round with about a minute or so left on the clock. Really, really impressive, I think, for Emil that he was able to get the win in a different way. Of course, usually the way that his fights go is if he wins the fight is because he stops the guy on the feet, or at least hurts them on the feet. That's been the case as of late anyway. So to get in a bit of a firefight and think, okay, this guy can crack a bit as well. Let me show that I'm a better mixed martial artist than him and not just a more powerful striker. To get the takedown, get the choke was very impressive. Emil was a little bit I don't think he was too happy with his performance. He did get caught a few times and had to switch up the game plan there. But, I think that this win, in terms of looking at Emil's career longevity, how far he can go, I think this win was really important for him and showed that, there's more to his game than just him being a ferocious puncher. And the main event, Stefano Paterno returning to Cage Warriors, of course, the former welterweight champion, taking out Scotty Stockman in the first round with a Darce choke. Just showed levels. I think Stefano Paterno looks better than when he was in Cage Warriors the last time, and he was the welterweight champion the last time he was in the promotion. So I'd like to see him. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Mads Burnell when he was in the UFC and he got cut, and everyone was like, why did he get cut? He looked really good in the UFC. And then he goes to Cage Warriors and just shows that he's a level above everyone else right now, and obviously then gets a move to Bellator, PFL now. But Stefano Paterno, of course, won the Cage Warriors welterweight title, and then he eventually, goes away and he went to Bellator, I believe, and it was kind of in that kind of limbo period for Bellator where they were signing a lot of European talent and then not really being able to use them because of COVID and things like that. So Paterno's been in a weird place. I feel like this is what he needs to get his career back on track and kind of realise his true potential is get, 3 fights in Cage Warriors. You're probably looking at one more fight for him and then a title fight. Obviously they got the vacant welterweight title fight coming up in Dublin. I would like to see Emil Brown versus Paterno, honestly. I think that would be really, really good, and that would set up a number 1 contender for the winner of that vacant title, or potentially, because Paterno's been there, done that before, you put him a little bit like how Mason Jones has gone in his return to Cage Warriors, how it feels like, he's racking up wins. He would realistically, I think, be the number one contender in that division, but he's almost on a separate path. He's going somewhere else. He's just fighting in Cage Warriors in order to get fights and then move on, whereas, some of these guys, the belt is obviously the main goal. Mason Jones has been there, done that, and I think you could say the same for Paterno, that maybe he doesn't need to be on that same path towards, the belt. Maybe he does. We'll see how that plays out. To go back to the fight that I skipped over, because I think, in my opinion, it was the best performance of the night, was Michele Martignoni, sorry if I've got that wrong, taking out Raz Bring in the first round. Back up at bantamweight for Martignoni. Obviously, he moved down to flyweight last time. He vacated the bantamweight title after beating Don Wooding. Moved down to flyweight to challenge Shaj Haq and let his teammate Dylan Hazan compete for the bantamweight title. Didn't go successfully, that flyweight trip for him. I did speak to him in his post-fight interview. Maybe we'll clip it in here, about being back up at bantamweight. He said the flyweight was not for him. It was not fun, but, he made the move so that Dylan Hazan could fight for the bantamweight title, and that's, incredibly admirable of him, because I think if he had probably got another title defense under his belt in the bantamweight division after beating Don Wooding, he probably would have been off to a big show. So, when I say big show, I'm not saying that to diminish Cage Warriors, right? But a lot of people want to win that title and then move on to the UFC, potentially Bellator or the PFL even. So I think Martignoni's right back up there. He looked incredible. The guy has crazy power in his hands as well. Like, it is wild. I thought Martignoni kind of stole the show, along with the MMA Fight Academy guys that all picked up solid wins. It was a tough fight for Leon Arms, that opening bout, but he weathered a storm and came through it. So, good stuff. And then we move on to Cage Warriors 168 on the Saturday night in Manchester. This card had a little bit of pacing problems, but I don't think it was Cage Warriors' fault. This is the nature of MMA, where sometimes you can have, an 11 fight card where you get all finishes or nearly all finishes, and suddenly, you're done and it's a little bit of an earlier night, and they tend to, delay the fights a little bit in order to space it out. And then sometimes you have fight cards like this where you have no time in between the fights to build to the next one or to reflect on the fights before. You just got to go and go and go, because every fight, I believe this is the first Cage Warriors card that has not had a first round finish. It's a certain amount of fights on a card to not get a finish in the first round. There was a lot of third round stoppages. There was a lot of late round stoppages. There was a lot of decisions on this card. So it went long. And of course you had 2 title fights and you had Liam Gittins halfway through the card. So that kind of felt like, I understand why they did it. Obviously the UFC was starting at an earlier time. So in order to not clash with that, and also to break up the pacing a little bit, not just for the fans, but also for the next gen team who had a bunch of fighters on this card, and, having them all on the main card would have been a nightmare for them. So I get why it was done. I think it led to some issues, but issues that couldn't have really been prevented, because it still would have gone long in the end anyway. Let's go through some of these fights. For me, the first fight of the night was a decent fight. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about there. The second fight of the night was fantastic. Fran Breen getting a win, climbing to 2-0, taking on Costine Bunya. I could get that wrong, so I do apologise for the pronunciation. But Fran Breen, I thought, looked wicked. A lot of people, the immediate reaction from all of the media were there was he looked like Luke Riley in that fight. And that is, we'll get to Luke a bit later on, but that's a huge compliment. Creative striking, hand speed looked phenomenal when he did let his combinations go. I loved at the end of every round throwing a Jonathan Haggerty style tomahawk elbow. That was wicked to see. You don't see that too much in MMA, and you could just see that he was feeling himself. He was in the groove. I thought that was a really, really good performance from him. He did get the third round finish as well. I think if that goes to a decision, you're a little bit like, that was a good performance. It was pretty dominant. Maybe he should have got the finish. He did get the finish, so ticked a lot of boxes with that one. Moving past a couple of more fights, Andy Yates versus Christian Tebbett was a banger of a fight. Super, super close. It was a unanimous decision, which I was honestly surprised about. I thought, I know that you can't really predict a split, but I thought the fight was so close that we would probably get a split. Christian Tebbett, by the way, who fell to 3-3 in this fight, I thought looked really, really good. Surprised me a lot. His range was fantastic, like the way he used it. But Andy Yates, grinded it out, got the win. Good fight there. Antonio Sheldon versus Tom Mearns also went to a decision. Probably another one like the previous fight where you're like, there's a finish any moment, and it didn't end up happening. Both guys so tough. Antonio Sheldon getting that win. One of the performances of the night came from Tom Nichols-Burton against Craig Rawlins. He's now 3-0 in his career, and in the middleweight division as well, which I think, definitely needs some new blood. And he's one to watch, I think. I think he could, be one of those guys that in a couple of years we're talking about him maybe headlining Cage Warriors shows, or at least fighting in, I say in a couple of years, maybe even a year, something like that. If he's able to stay active, maybe get another fight or two this year, maybe another 2 or 3 next year, I think that he'll be right up there in that middleweight division. So definitely keep an eye on him. And then we had the first title fight of the night. Liam Gittins defending the bantamweight title against Roberto Hernandez. This was supposed to end the prelim card, but because of the way that the times played out, it ended up opening the main card. And this was, I think, kind of the fight that a lot of people predicted it would be. I'll be honest and say I expected a little bit more from Hernandez. He looked really good in that first round. I thought he looked really fast. His like entries with his jabs and stuff were fantastic. He was being a nightmare of a counter striker against Gittins, who, maybe, you don't expect Liam Gittins to run away with a fight in the first round. It's not his style. And so when Hernandez has that brilliant opening round, you're like, okay, well, let's see how long he can keep this up for, because Gittins is not going to stop. So if Hernandez does at any point, that is where the fight is going to swing, and it did in that second round. Liam just started getting to him. He got a 5th round finish, rear naked choke. I think he could have probably got it earlier on, but, he was putting a lot of pressure on, so he was tired himself. But, they don't call him Nightmare for no reason. The pressure of this guy, his ability to just walk people down with, disregard for what comes back at him. And, by the 3rd round, maybe, Hernandez looked like he'd been through 5 rounds already. Every leg kick was getting, a crazy reaction from him, spinning every time he gets leg kicked. And his body language was just, you could tell that he was melting in front of Liam Gittins, and the finish felt like only a matter of time. And again, this is kind of a little bit like the Fran Breen performance, where I think if it goes to a decision, you're like, okay, good performance from Liam, but that guy was probably there to be put away in those later rounds, and Liam did it. So ticked a couple of boxes. Will he be off to the UFC next? I hope so. If there's a guy that deserves it, like Liam Gittins, such a nice guy, and what a crazy swing of results he's had over the last year and a half. Like, just, grinding away, getting wins, kind of going a bit under the radar, and then gets his moment against Reece McEwen to capitalise on. He does it, beats this guy who obviously has been making a name for himself over on the American roster. So, yeah, I'd love to see it. Will it happen? I would wager that he'll probably have one more fight in Cage Warriors, if we're being honest, but I would love to see it either way. Alessandro Giordano versus Sam Kelly is one of the bloodiest fights I've ever seen. Period. I mean, I was there for Ross Houston and Nick Dalby, and that one will always take the top spot, but the canvas was like an abstract painting by the end of this fight, and if you were tuning in, you were probably going, well, yeah, they've had some wars so far on this card, and there were some wars, but it was pretty much all blood from that fight. Giordano got the finish in the 3rd round. It was a beautiful, I think it was a left hook that he caught him with. Beautiful finish. But yeah, this fight was crazy. You had Harrell Cohen taking on Adam Cullen, getting a split decision upset here. And maybe I'm Adam Cullen's bad luck charm, because I've been in the BC Arena twice now to watch him fight, and those are his 2 losses on his pro record. I don't know. I would have to speak to Cullen. I didn't speak to him before the fight or after or whatever, so I would need to speak to him about how his camp went, but to me, he didn't really look himself in this fight. And I was expecting after he bounced back from his loss, that he would be back to himself, and I just didn't really see it. He grappled super heavy, early on, and Harrell Cohen just looked a little bit too tricky for him on the ground, just smart with positions. I thought that he had won the fight. It was close at points because Adam did more damage, I think, but I think that Cohen definitely deserved the win. I was surprised, honestly, to see it was a split. So I wish nothing but the best for Adam Cullen. He's a great guy. And like I said, I just don't think it was his night on this occasion. But, I'm sure he'll be back better. And hopefully next time I go to the BC, it's on a better night for Adam Cullen. James Power versus John Luca Rocca. This kind of summed up the card for me. It was a decent fight. One that maybe you would expect to finish in, and the finish didn't happen. Good for James to bounce back with a win here. And I think he's a really talented guy, and I think that he could go very far in Cage Warriors. So I was happy to see him, get back in the win column. We'll come to the co-main event last, a little bit like we did with Martignoni, because I think that's the performance that everyone was talking about. We'll go to the main event, Andy Clamp versus Matty Byfield. I'd heard from a few people that the arena had kind of got a little bit empty, or emptier by this point. There was still a decent amount of people in there to support Andy and Matty. But of course, like I said earlier on, a lot of people showed up to support the next-gen fighters, so when they'd all fought, yeah, some of the crowd did leave, although I didn't really notice it myself because I wasn't out in the arena for this one. I was in the media room, but yeah. Pretty much Andy Clamp doing what Andy Clamp does, right? I thought Matty looked really good in the first round, but just, a little bit like... people always talk about Dricus du Plessis and how, yeah, he gets tired, but he gets his opponents more tired, and he's comfortable fighting like that because that was his style. Obviously, I know that, he had the surgery, and I thought his cardio looked a lot better against Sean Strickland, whatever. But that was a little bit the story of this fight, I think, for Andy Clamp, is that the grappling was wearing them both down at an alarming rate, but that's what Andy Clamp does. And so grappling whilst, tired and breathing super heavy, that's what he wants. He knows he's going to make himself tired, but he's going to hopefully make you more tired, and he'll stay on top. And so it puts him in the best position to win that fight. And, he put his strikes together. He had a couple of submission attempts, but put his strikes together in the third round to get the stoppage to become the Cage Warriors light heavyweight champion. And you would imagine he'll probably only have, maybe one more fight before he's gathering interest, because light heavyweight is a division that needs new people constantly. So Matty will be back stronger. I was gutted for him. Obviously very happy for Andy Clamp because he's deserved this for a long time. But gutted for Matty Byfield, but I know he'll be back better. And he's got time on his side as well. So the co-main event of Cage Warriors 168. Luke Riley defeats John DeJesus. Unanimous decision. Let's get to the not great part of this fight, which was the final 30 seconds, where Luke Riley takes a knee to the body, I believe it was. And you can see, he's walking forward and he takes that knee and he steps forward a little bit and then suddenly put that in reverse, starts walking backwards and was basically covering up for the last 30 seconds. That body shot, really took it out of him. But that crazy moment alone, it's a Luke Riley fight. You're going to get a little bit of moment of chaotic, even in a mature, calculated, calm performance from Luke Riley on this night. You always get a little bit of crazy with that guy, so it was exciting, I'll give him that. But the first 2.5 rounds, I think this was Luke Riley's best performance to date. A veteran opponent in John DeJesus, who has fought some very, very good guys in his career, and been competitive with a lot of them. And Luke Riley looked like the veteran in there. The way that his striking is always really creative, I think, and always really deadly, but he just didn't leave himself open to get countered as much in this fight. And I've spoken to Luke in the past, and he said, I can beat these guys if I play it safe and just jab and pick them off, hit and move. But he loves to put on a show, it's who Luke Riley is. He's a crowd pleaser. And in this fight, I think he managed to do both. He was able to, please the crowd because they, he was landing some incredible combinations and everyone was jumping out of their seats and it was like, oh, is he going to finish him? But he was like, no, this guy's a veteran, I'm going to pick my shots. And it was a beautifuful performance from Luke Riley, I thought. Such a good guy, such an incredible talent. His striking is phenomenal. 9-0 now in his career, which is remarkable. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets signed to the UFC, either to be on this Manchester card that's coming up or to be on Contender Series for the next season. Would I like to have, see him maybe have one more in Cage Warriors? If there's an opportunity, it's tough because that division is so stacked right now, that featherweight division. You've obviously got the vacant title fight coming up with Harry Hardwick in Newcastle. So Oh, is it Newcastle, that one? Yeah, I think it is, right? If it wasn't for the fact that Harry Hardwick also exists in this division, I would have liked to have seen Luke get a 5-rounder under his belt, maybe, just as that final check mark. That is kind of the one thing he hasn't done in Cage Warriors, is fight 5 rounds. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessary to see him and Harry Hardwick at this stage. I think you'd just be hurting them, to be honest, because both guys have come through some tough tests already in their career. I don't think we need to see, whether they're just prospects or whether they can actually go far. I think we know that both guys can go far. So I would like to see it. Luke Riley debuting in Manchester, I not to, undersell him, but put him in the first fight of the night on that Manchester fight night and watch him blow the roof off the place. And I think he's more than ready for that call-up. And for me, he was the star of the show by far. And, taking his opponent's front teeth out is wild. And, always so good with his time as well with interviewing him. Luke Riley's a diamond of a guy. And, him in the UFC is something that everyone should be campaigning for, in my opinion. Thank you for checking out this review. I know that we went quite long on this one, so I do apologise, but there was a lot to get to with 2 fight cards. As I mentioned, I will be in London for the next card. That looks like a very good event. So, I will catch you all very soon for a preview of that and all that good stuff. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We'll have a bunch of interviews coming soon and stuff like that. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed the fights, and I'll see you very soon. Peace.